For DynamoDB, there are some core components that one should be aware of. These are attributes, items, and tables. So attributes are the key values that form a particular item, and multiple items would be in a particular table. So if I take up the example of if I have to generate a store a schema for cars, so I would have a car ID as my primary key, and then the attributes are the model, make, and your company. So for first row, where my car ID is 1010, the model is S class, the make is 2020, and the company is Mercedes. And for the other row, 1011 car ID, I have the model XLS, make is in 2021, and the company is Mahindra, seating capacity of 5, and your color is blue. So as you understand, with NoSQL, you don't have to be, you're not rigid with the schema of your struct data. So with like car ID of 1011, you just have 3 attributes: model, make, and company. Whereas for your 1011 car ID, you have model, make, company, seating capacity, and the color. And similarly, going forward, if you would have another car, that could just have 2 attributes, and it could have 10 attributes. So that is the power of your NoSQL databases, and DynamoDB leverages that to a greater extent. Digging deeper into this, let's talk about the primary key. So primary key in DynamoDB is basically made up of 2 items. One is partition key, other is the partition key plus the sort key. So the partition key is composed of, if you are using partition key, it is usually just one attribute. Like in this table, the car ID was your primary key, and it would be your partition key as well. Coming back, its value is used as an input to internal hash function that basically decides where this particular item should be stored. And in this case, one item per value of partition key will be valid in your table. When we talk about when you have a primary key as a combination of partition key and sort key, so your primary key becomes a composite primary key that consists of 2 attributes, that is partition key and sort key. So partition key is the unique ID, but the sort key can be multiple. If I have to pick up an example of primary key that is composed of partition key and sort key, so let's talk about a to-do table. So where my user ID would be the partition key and sort key would be the to-do ID. So then I would be able to easily filter out the users are given users all the to-dos. So that is how I would be setting up a primary key if I'm using DynamoDB for a to-do management application. So now explaining a bit further into primary key that is composed of partition key and sort key. So value of the partition key is used to decide the partition to store the data, where it should be stored. All the items with the same partition key are stored together. So this is a common between both the cases, similar, nothing unique. It's just it's a combination when you are using partition key and sort key, and when you are not, it is just the partition key that you use. So you can have multiple items per value of partition key. For example, when I gave you the reference of a to-do management application, so there your user ID becomes the partition key and your to-do ID is the sort key. So you could have multiple sort keys for a given partition key, but a user ID of one will have multiple to-do IDs, let's say 1, to-do 2. So all this will belong to one partition only. Now, if I have to talk a little bit about the primary keys. So primary keys must be scalar. They should hold only one value. It cannot have multiple values, as in it cannot be a list or a map or a document structure. Allowed data types for your primary keys are string, number, and binary. Your primary key becomes a hash attribute, whereas your sort key is a range attribute. So hash is a unique item in your entire data set, whereas your sort key will have will be in a particular range, like 1 to 100. So for a given partition. So that is how it will group all your items with the same partition in a same partition. Okay, so DynamoDB has the concept of indexes known as secondary indexes. By default, there's a index using your primary key, which either would be using your partition key or the combination of partition key and sort key, depending upon how you have structured it. So let's say for secondary indexes, you have global secondary index and a local secondary index. So let's talk about the global secondary index first. The index in this is different to a partition key and sort key, what you have defined in a table. So in this scenario, like if I talk about the previous example of cars table, so I had this car ID as the primary key. That would be my partition key. But if I have to generate a global secondary index, it could be make would be my primary partition key, and your sort key could be make model. So it would group all the respective items, rearrange it, and store it in a different partition. So these indexes span over the entire table, allowing a query to across all the partition keys, because it has a group of data that was not primarily structured when you had defined a database table. So global secondary indexes help you to query tables on a different items on different keys, which were just attributes for you. So for example, the model and the make in this scenario were just the attributes. But if you don't have these as your indexes, so you will not be able to query your table with model or make. You would be only be able to query your table according to the car ID. But if I have to search my table for, let's say, S class cars, so I need the model. Now, the default quota for a table to have global secondary indexes is 20. Now, coming back to the local secondary indexes, it is the index that has the same partition key that we use to define when we are creating the table, but the sort key can be different. So if I have to give an example with the same cars table, so my primary key, partition key needs to be same. So it will always be car ID, but I can have a different sort key that would be make or a company. So using this index, I would be able to get all the cars that were made in a year or made by a specific company. So that is how you decide like what type of indexes that you generate. So this would query only a partition, because all your items related to a partition key will be stored in a single partition. So, and your partition key for this index is your same partition key that is the partition key of your table as well. So all your data for this secondary index will also be placed in the same partition. And you can have maximum of 5 local secondary indexes for your table. Another thing, you can only define this local secondary indexes when you're creating a table, not after that. So if you have created a table, you can only create global secondary indexes. Now let's talk about the data types that DynamoDB supports. So there are 3 types. One is scalar, document, and sets. So scalar is that can only represent one value. like number, string, binary, boolean, or null. When we talk about the document, so it can represent a complex structure that nests multiple attributes similar to JSON. So that can be either of list or your map. So map is something similar to JSON object only, but list you can compare it to your arrays or list in Python. So it's an ordered collection of values. So if you can have multiple numbers or multiple strings in a list, that would be defined like 1, 2, 3. That would be assigned to a particular attribute. You can have in a document type data type, you can have maximum of 32 levels, as in this. So this nesting could go to 32 levels deep. Now, when we talk about set, so these represent multiple scalar values. Like in scalar, we could only have one value, but in sets, we could have multiple values of either number, string, or binary. But these should be of same scalar type, as in it should be either just contain numbers or strings or binaries. And each value should be unique, like we usually have in set of your JavaScript or in Python. So it is not in order. So you shouldn't be expecting whatever you saved in what order. So if you are saving numbers, if you saved it like this, you could expect it to come like this. So empty sets are also not allowed because they won't be unique across your table or an item. So that would cause a problem to save. That is it for the theoretical description of what DynamoDB is. So we'll cover up the rest of the sections in separate videos. Thank you.